Hello, I'm Evely, and I will tell you one story. Let's go. First, it was nothing. A flicker in the corner of Mark's eye, a sound mistaken for the settling of old wood. But as the days passed, as the nights stretched long and uneasy, it became something more. Started with the word Solomon. Mark didn't know a Solomon. He had no friends by that name, no family, no memory of anyone important bearing it. But it followed him. The first time, it was in the bathroom mirror, written in a streak of fog while he showered. He had stood frozen, heart hammering, watching as the letters faded. He had tried to laugh it off, chalking it up to some strange trick of condensation. But then it appeared again, scratched into the frost on his car windshield the next morning. That night, Mark heard it in the wind. A whisper, elongated and brittle, hissing through the cracks in his apartment walls. Solomon. The voice was soft, almost childlike. He turned on every light, paced his small living room, checking his phone, trying to ground himself in normalcy. But his stomach churned with a deep, gnawing unease. The following day at work, Mark found it again, this time on the whiteboard in the break room. Solomon scrawled in black marker. No one else noticed. When he mentioned it to a coworker, they only shrugged, dismissing it. That night, it came back in the voice of an animal. He was walking home late, cutting through the empty park near his building. The streetlights flickered, humming softly, casting pools of dim orange glow on the path ahead. As he passed the playground, a cat, a mangy, thin creature, watched him from the shadows. It let out a low, guttural noise, then mewled. Solomon. Mark stumbled backward, his breath caught in his throat. The cat hissed, darted into the bushes, and vanished. He sprinted the rest of the way home, locking his door and throwing every light on. But the word was waiting for him, scratched into the walls, written in some jagged, uneven hand. He grabbed a cloth, scrubbing at it, his pulse hammering. The marks faded, but the word remained burned into his mind. By the end of the week, it was everywhere, whispered in the wind, carved into his wooden nightstand, scribbled in the margins of books he hadn't opened in years. And then the voices came, not just the wind, not just the animals, but children, invisible, giggling, whispering in the walls. Solomon, Solomon, always the same word, the same inflection, as if it were a name too familiar to be questioned. He barely slept. His eyes grew sunken, his hands trembled. People at work noticed. He tried to pretend it was fine, that he was just tired, but the truth was clawing at the back of his skull. Then, one night, something changed. He woke to silence. No whispers, no rustling, no strange scratching at the floorboards. The air was too still, too heavy, thick with something unseen. And then, from the darkness of his bedroom corner, a voice, closer, clearer than ever before. "You don't remember me." Mark bolted upright, a cold sweat breaking across his back. He reached blindly for his phone, for the lamp beside his bed, but before his fingers found the switch, a shape moved. A man stood in the shadows. No, not a man. The shape was all wrong. Too tall, too thin, as if stretched like a shadow against the wall. Its arms hung at odd angles, and though its face was shrouded in darkness, Mark felt its gaze boring into him. And then it took a step forward. Mark scrambled backward, nearly falling off the bed. His breath hitched, a ragged, strangled thing, as the figure whispered again, voice smooth and knowing. "You forgot me." The room plunged into cold. Not the kind of chill that comes from a winter draft, but something deeper, something that gnawed at the bones. The air itself thickened, pressing against his chest. Then, without another sound, the figure melted into the floor, gone as if it had never been there. But the whisper remained. Solomon. Mark barely slept that night. He paced the apartment, lights on, music playing, anything to drown out the silence. But no matter where he went, he felt watched. And then, as he stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the sink, something new happened. His reflection moved. He saw it in the window above the sink, a shadowy version of himself standing in the glass. But when he turned, nothing was there. The reflection lifted a hand, pressed it against the glass. Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. And then, just before it faded, one last whisper. Remember. The next morning, Mark left town. He packed a bag, got in his car, and drove. No destination, no plan, just away. But as the miles stretched behind him, something gnawed at his mind. A memory, blurred and fractured, trying to surface. Had he known a Solomon? The name tugged at something deep, something locked away. And then, on the side of the road, he saw it. A sign, weathered and old, standing at the edge of a forgotten path leading into the woods. The letters were barely visible beneath layers of moss, but he knew what they said before he even read them. Welcome to Solomon Hill. The name slammed into him like a hammer. Images flashed, quick, jagged, painful. A boy, laughing. Blood on the ground. A whisper in the trees. Mark gripped the wheel, knuckles white. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. He couldn't remember, but something in him knew. Something in him knew he should not go back. And yet, his hands turned the wheel. The car rolled forward. And the wind whispered the name. Solomon. The road into Solomon Hill twisted like a serpent through barren woods. Mark's car sputtered its way along a cracked asphalt ribbon lined by skeletal trees. In the suffocating silence, the only company was the recurring, whispering cadence of one word, Solomon, echoing through the rustling of dead leaves and the mournful creak of the wind. When Mark finally pulled up at the outskirts of the forsaken town, a heavy, unnatural fog clung to every surface. The buildings stood like relics of a cursed era, half-collapsed houses with windows that stared blankly, a dilapidated church whose steeple pierced the gloom, and narrow alleys that seemed to beckon him deeper into darkness. Every structure bore the same grotesque signature, scrawled repeatedly on walls and door frames was the word Solomon, its jagged letters bleeding into the decayed wood and stone. With his pulse pounding like a frantic drum, Mark stepped out of the car. The chill in the air was not just temperature but a suffocating dread that seeped into his bones. He moved slowly, drawn by a compulsion that felt both familiar and forbidden. Every step he took resonated with the echoes of tiny, high-pitched voices, like the giggles of unseen children, murmuring the cursed name in a tone that was simultaneously innocent and malevolent. A narrow lane led him to the old church. Its doors hung askew, creaking with every gust of wind. Stepping inside, Mark found himself swallowed by darkness and the overpowering smell of rot. Faint light seeped in through broken stained glass, projecting eerie, multicolored patterns that danced on the stone floor. And there, along the wall of the nave, was the word again, Solomon, etched in a script that twisted like thorny vines. He pressed his trembling hand against the cool surface. In that instant, the whisper of a voice echoed around him, soft yet insistent. You cannot hide from what you are. The words reverberated through the cavernous space. Mark felt as though unseen eyes had pinned him to the spot. His mind raced with memories that were not entirely his own, shadowy fragments of a childhood long suppressed, moments of fear and pain intertwined with an inexplicable sense of inevitability. The voices of animal children and the rustling wind merged into a single chorus, each syllable punctuated by an inexplicable, low hum that vibrated in his chest. Desperate for answers, he wandered through the church's narrow corridors. Every step stirred the dust of centuries, and every turn unveiled another canvas of dread. In a crumbling office, he discovered a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The entries detailed a long-forgotten pact, a ritual intended to summon a presence known only as Solomon. The words spoke of a sacrificial rite, of souls entwined with ancient darkness, and of a name that served as a tether between life and something far more sinister. Before Mark could absorb the journal's grim confessions, a sudden commotion shattered the silence. A soft, childlike giggle emanated from behind a decayed wooden door. With cautious resolve, he opened it. Inside, the room was lined with mirrors, each reflecting distorted images of the decrepit space. But in every reflection, behind his own trembling form, moved a second figure, a shadowy, emaciated child with eyes too old for its face. Its mouth formed a silent plea, and from its ghostly lips came the word. Remember. In that moment, the walls themselves seemed to come alive. The paint peeled away, revealing a writhing mass of symbols and inscriptions that pulsed like a heartbeat. The sound of scratching, like tiny claws against stone, echoed around him. The voices of the animal children grew louder, overlapping in a discordant symphony that rattled his very sanity. Mark staggered back, his eyes darting in terror. Suddenly, the floor beneath him trembled. Cracks snaked across the ground, and from them emerged figures, pale, contorted shapes of lost souls. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions, their faces a blend of human anguish and animalistic features. One reached out a hand, its skeletal fingers twitching as if trying to grasp his essence. In a flash, the figures converged, their murmurs intensifying into a cacophony. "You are one of us. You have always been Solomon's." Mark's mind reeled. Memories crashed into him like tidal waves, images of a childhood spent in isolation, whispers in the dark corridors of an old mansion, and a recurring nightmare where the name Solomon was chanted by faceless figures. The realization hit him like a blow. He was bound to this name, this curse, by blood and fate. With terror rising, he fled from the church, stumbling into the misty night. The town of Solomon Hill now seemed a living nightmare, a labyrinth of horror where every surface bled the same word, every gust of wind carried a promise of despair. As he ran through empty streets, the voices followed him relentlessly, and from every darkened doorway, spectral children and gaunt, sorrowful faces watched his desperate escape. At the edge of the town, Mark paused, heart hammering as he looked back one last time. The horizon was a shroud of darkness punctuated by the twisted silhouettes of buildings, and from deep within that gloom, the wind sighed the name once more. Solomon. The sound echoed in his ears as he turned and plunged into the unknown, each step haunted by the certainty that the curse was not confined to Solomon Hill. It was a part of him, and it would follow him into every shadow, every whispered breeze. And as the night swallowed him whole, a final, chilling thought crystallized in his mind. The true horror was not the cursed name itself, but the fact that his destiny was inextricably entwined with it, a destiny that would haunt him forever. In the voices of the wind and in the eyes of the unseen. Thank you very much, and see you all in the next video.